It's no secret that Disney has been on an embarrassing downward spiral since the start of the pandemic and in the years since, with flop after flop, needless political involvement regardless of one's view on the discourse at hand, decreased theme park attendance, and little hope of finding an awe-inspiring successor to Bob Iger. Things haven't been looking so hot for them. And then they released this masterpiece of a short film. And I promise we're gonna get into why Once Upon a Studio is objective gold, but for context, I think it's important for me to throw in just how much of a cynic I am when it comes to the modern state of the Walt Disney Company. Reading articles, social media posts, and banging my fists at the absolutely absurd creative and executive decisions Bob Iger has made over the past several years, almost to a level where any credible business school might consider producing a textbook called How to Burn an Empire, The Reign of the Bobs, has become somewhat of a part-time job meets guilty pleasure for me. So if I say Once Upon a Studio is good, trust me when I say it's good. Now this video is going to be broken into 3 parts. 1, the backstory of the film, then my commentary, and finally, what this likely means for Disney. Now, the backstory to this film, to me, contains a level of lore and intrigue that very few modern Disney productions contain. Once Upon a Studio was conceptualized during the pandemic in a Taco Bell parking lot by animators Dan Abraham and Trent Corey. The two would meet there and talk to one another from their cars while everyone was on lockdown. While ecstatic about the idea of the film, they had a really big problem. And it's a problem that Disney has actually seen before. Do you remember the Kingdom Keepers book series about a group of teenagers who would become holograms in the middle of the night and get transported into the Disney parks to defeat the villains who were trying to expand their rule? Well, one of the most agreed upon reasons the Kingdom Keepers television series, once in the works at Disney some amount of years ago, was cancelled was because of the sheer amount of IP that would have to be stuffed into one series. The sheer amount of characters that many believe would have made the series so saturated that it would have lost its marketability. And that was exactly what Abraham and Corey feared in the Taco Bell parking lot as they were mustering up the courage to pitch Once Upon a Studio to Walt Disney Animation Studios' chief creative officer, Jennifer Lee. This perceived notion that the idea would get a big fat red light. To their surprise, however, Jennifer Lee began crying tears of joy and Once Upon a Studio was in motion. Alright, so right out of the gate, I already like this, and part of this actually has to do to the music, which we will get into in a moment. But the only thing I didn't like about this opening scene is that I thought the dialogue was a little wonky and unnatural, but other than that, I thought this scene was cute, and it effectively conveyed the social progress of a studio, which at one point didn't allow for female animators at all, to having a young black woman and an old white man working together and reflecting together without over-messaging. And that's how it should be. I also love the feeling that the phrase, "if this blank could talk," evokes, because no matter how many times I hear it, no matter how many contexts I hear it in, it always gives me a really good, sappy feeling. Now, as for the score, I'm a proud critic of 21st century classical music, but I've got to say that the music in the opening to this film, before the characters even come to life, feels 21st century. It feels very modern in that its unison lines coupled with the piano don't quite feel like a Baroque, classical, or romantic score, but also don't feel like John Williams or any other 20th century orchestral music. It's clearly a contemporary sound that complements the moment where the two animators with multiple generations between them take a minute to reflect. Yet it doesn't rely on electronic elements or a pseudo Hans Zimmer effect. It just feels modern without sounding bad. Also, the transition into the Night on Bald Mountain segment was absolutely brilliant. Not to mention that they literally mixed the audio in a way that sounded just like a TV does when you record it, and then removed the effect after Chernabog popped out of the screen. I mean, the attention to detail here was absolutely incredible. Prince Charming's shoe falling off actually made me laugh out loud, and the amount of original voice actors in this film was astounding. I mean, they had Jodie Benson, Idina Menzel, Bob Jones, Josh Gad. It was just incredible. And aside from the different gags and voice actors they brought back, the sheer amount of talent that was showcased in this film was equally fascinating. Burke Klein, one of the animators, animated the shot of Stromboli shaking the vending machine, which I thought was a really nice touch. The fact that the same animator animated both in 2D and 3D in the exact same sequence. Richard M. Sherman, the surviving brother of the Sherman brothers, who, as you likely know, wrote It's a Small World, Carousel of Progress, Winnie the Pooh, Mary Poppins, so many different things, even recorded Feed the Birds in Walt's office on the same piano he'd play on for Walt, specifically on a Friday afternoon, which is when he would usually do so back in the 60s. To be honest, hearing how much his voice has changed in recent years is a bit bittersweet, and that he is 95 years old, yet at the same time is so touching in that he himself is a piece of living history, having played piano for Walt Disney in his later years. I mean, talk about a fascinating and irreplaceable career. There was really just so much soul to this film, though I hate to say that it's very unlikely that this little short film means the start of a new era for Disney. Now you're probably thinking you just raved about the film, and then you seemingly backhandedly called it a little short film. But to understand the choice of words there, we need to go back to Walt's time at his Disney. As someone who admires Walt, despite his flaws and the direction of the Disney company today, it's crucial to recognize that Walt himself did not create the mega media conglomerate we know today. Surely he laid the groundwork for such a legacy, but when you look at what Walt did in his life, you realize that he was only, and I say the word only intentionally, hear me out, you'll understand what I mean in a minute, was only an innovative filmmaker who created an innovative theme park. And again, as someone who greatly admires him, I'm not saying only in a condescending, Walt was so problematic, we need to acknowledge all the things he did wrong and start attributing his accomplishments to everyone else he stole credit from. That's not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying here is that Walt, in his lifetime, in his career, was a visionary filmmaker who created a groundbreaking theme park, and that was it. And the reason this is relevant is because Disney's growth into what it is today, despite becoming larger and broader, has been very obviously a massive diluting of their brand, especially in recent years. In other words, Walt only creating a studio and a theme park from a branding lens was the reason Disney was so widely beloved, because their branding was concentrated pretty much in Americana and European fairy tales. And prior to the culture of American enterprise shifting from businesses like Walt Disney Productions in most of the 20th century, because this is a much larger problem than Disney, relevant to many industries, to a culture of unregulated asset acquisition and profit at all cost mentality, brands like Disney during Walt's lifetime relied on innovation and creative use of their IP and established style and reputation to keep moving forward. Take the Disney Renaissance, for example. The reason Disney moved forward with Howard Ashman's groundbreaking idea of blending musical theater with the animation medium was because at a time when they didn't have Pixar to fall back on, Marvel to fall back on, Star Wars to fall back on, Hulu to fall back on, 21st Century Fox, I mean you name it, they had to envision high-quality, innovative concepts in-house and under far fewer roofs to stay afloat. That is quite literally no longer the case for the Walt Disney Company. And while I would not go as far as to say that they couldn't take greater risks, because they can, as they did with Once Upon a Studio, and won't take greater risks, because they did with Once Upon a Studio, the likelihood that Disney, and I mean the core of Disney, not the umbrella term Disney, but the root of what makes this company, the Walt Disney Company, will return to or remain in its most primal yet ironically most advanced state are very, very slim, because they just don't need to.